Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's series of lectures where we take a look at time and free will. In this particular lecture, we'll take a look at the philosophy of time travel. Is this even philosophically possible? Does it make any logical sense for time travel to exist, for it to be possible? Well, let's think about how we started talking about time in our class in the first place, where Kant said that time wasn't something that existed in reality. Rather, time and space were categories of mind. So we are the ones who impose time and impose space upon our experience. They're the ways in which we understand our experience, which means time isn't a real thing out there in the world. Okay, well, is that necessarily true? Think back to your just normal experience of time. Right now, you probably feel the passage of time, right? You feel as if time is continually moving forward and there's not really much you can do about it. And you probably also feel as if time is a constantly moving thing, right? You can't pause it necessarily, and everybody will experience the passage of time the same. Um, this is the common everyday conception of time, and this was, written about even by philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, who wrote the following: "Time is a sort of river of passing events, and strong is its current. No sooner is a thing brought to sight than it is swept by, and another takes its place, and this too will be swept away." Doesn't that explain or describe what you normally feel like? Like time is like this current, this river just continually moving, and you can't really do anything about the movement of it. You can't cause the river to flow backwards. It feels as if time is always moving in the forward direction, and it's out there, right? It's out there. It's not as if you're imposing it upon the world. Well, this common everyday notion of time is going to change dramatically when we get to Einstein. And as you saw in the introductory video for this week, Einstein came up with the idea that time is actually tied to space. Here's the implication that we're worried about. The implication is that if time is just another dimension in this reality that he refers to as space-time, then just as space is out here, right? X and Y, Z, I'm sorry, where am I pointing? Just as space is out here, well, then time is out here too, right? Just as I can go this direction and I can go that direction because they're out here, well, past and future is out there too, which theoretically means that the future already exists and it's something that I can go to, just like I can go to the left or go to the right in space. And the past is there for me to go to because they're all just it's just another dimension within space-time. Okay, well, does that logically even make sense to go to the future or go to the past? Is time travel philosophically even possible? This is the big question we'll take a look at for today, right? So we'll take a look at various arguments against this, various arguments against time travel. The first of which is the self-contained loops argument. And this is the problem that's raised by the short story I had you read, All You Zombies. Okay, so this may have been confusing at first to get a sense for what was happening. Time travel stories tend to be that way, but hopefully stuck with it and got a sense for who each of these characters are, right? Jane and this baby and the unmarried mother and the bartender and what they were doing within the story. So let's try to recap without blowing our minds here. A possible final exam short answer question could be the following: summarize the short story All You Zombies and explain how it could be used to argue that time travel may not be possible. Okay, so let's try to summarize this. So at the beginning of the story, we have this character named the unmarried mother, which, if you didn't notice, was a guy, right? The unmarried mother was a name or a title for a dude who's at this bar, and he meets this bartender who happens to also be a time traveler. Okay, so the unmarried mother is bummed out. That's why he's at a bar to drink away his misery. And the time traveler decides to take the unmarried mother into the past. So from 1970, they travel back to the past, and the unmarried mother, this guy, is dropped off in 1963. When he's dropped off in 1963, he meets this girl named Jane, and they fall in love with each other, right? They can't help but be attracted to one another. So, as a result of their relationship, Jane gets pregnant. Okay. Before Jane is able to give birth, the time traveler comes back, grabs the unmarried mother, and takes him away from Jane. To Jane's eyes, she has no idea what was happening. She has no idea what just occurred. All she knows is that this guy that she fell in love with is gone. So she's bummed out because she's pregnant with his child. Well, she goes to the hospital to give birth. A doctor who's trying to help her give birth notices that Jane is a true hermaphrodite, which means that Jane has both male and female organs. The doctor decides, just because, to remove the female organs. So here's Jane in the hospital, and when she leaves the hospital with her baby, she is no longer she. She is only now a he, having only male genitals, having only male organs. I know, messed up, but let's continue with the story. So Jane has this new baby, and then eventually the time traveler comes back to that day, grabs the baby, and takes the baby back to 1945. So here's poor Jane, who lost her lover, who now lost her baby, who's now a man, and then eventually finds himself at a bar where he meets this time traveling bartender. But wait, what happens to the baby? Well, the baby in 1945 grows up to become Jane. And then what happens to the unmarried mother? The unmarried mother, after being time traveled by the bartender, eventually grows older to become the bartender. So what do we have here? Well, we have a really odd family tree where Jane, the unmarried mother, the bartender, the baby, they're all each other's mom and dad. They're all each other's grandparents and great grandparents, right? They are all each other. What we have in this time travel story is what we refer to as a self-contained loop, because the beginning of Jane's life isn't really the beginning, right? And the end of Jane's life isn't really the end. It's a loop which throws a lot of people into a frenzy because that doesn't make any sense. The way we think about life, there's a beginning and an end to it. Here, there's a continual loop where the beginning really isn't the beginning because the beginning is caused by something that happens later. So we can take a look to see the various contradictions that are within the story and say that, look, time travel may not be possible because it doesn't make logical sense for self-contained loops to occur. Okay, so why can't we have self-contained loops? One, it implies backward causation. It implies the fact that the future can cause the past. That doesn't make any sense. How can the future cause? It's like saying right now you are causing your grade in the midterm you took 3 weeks ago. Does that make any sense to say that you are right now causing the grade that happened in the past? Well, within the story, we see that's what happens, right? The future is causing the past. And that logically does not make sense to a lot of people. Two, the no destination argument. For a lot of people, it doesn't make sense to go to the past or even the future because those things don't exist. The only thing that really exists is the present. You can't experience a past or you can't experience a future. The only time you ever experience is the now. So there really is no future or past to go to. Hopefully you see from what we talked about Einstein that there might be an objection to be made there, right? Against this one. And then three, the in two places at once paradox. Because within the story, you have the same person being in two places at the same time. Does that make any sense for you to be in bed while you are also on top of you at the same time? Okay, so can you think now of ways of defending against these objections? Or can you think of ways of countering these arguments? Well, backward causation. Think about the idea of backward causation. Is it possible for the future to cause the past? Well, if you are time traveling, then what you are calling the future or what you're calling the past is actually your present. If you go back in time to cause something, it's not as if the future is causing the past. When you go back in time to like a day ago, I mean, that feels to you like your present. So you are actually causing the future from what you feel is the present, right? How about the second one? No destination argument. Well, as we noticed with Einstein, right, Einstein does say that the future is out there and the past is out there. So there really are destinations in time for you to go to. You can go to the past, you can go to the future. His idea of space-time, which by the way has been verified through various experiments, seems to imply that the future and past exist. And then three, in two places at once paradox. Well, what do you think? Can you be in two places at once? How about right now? Aren't you even right now being in two places at once? Aren't you right now both uh, to the left and to the right of your chair? Aren't you right now on your seat and um, raising your hand? So you're in this space and in the space occupied by your rear end at the same time. So what do you think? Is the argument based upon self-contained loops enough for you to believe time travel is not possible? Well, there's others too, right? There's other arguments against time travel. For instance, the changing the past paradox. And you may have seen this or heard about this as the grandfather paradox. It's probably the most famous paradox that puts a wrench into the possibility of time travel. Okay, so the changing the past paradox. The most popular form of the paradox is referred to as the grandfather paradox. And in the story or in the thought experiment, if time travel is possible, then it should be possible for you to go to the past. Okay? If you go to the past, then it could be possible that you shoot and kill your grandfather before he has a chance to meet your grandmother and have one of your parents. But do you see how that's a problem? If time travel allows for you to go to the past, which it does, and then you shoot your grandfather before he meets your grandmother and have your dad or your mom, then you wouldn't exist. And if you wouldn't exist, then you wouldn't have been able to gone back to shoot your grandfather, which means your grandfather would have met your grandmother and then had you, or had your parent, which then led to having you, but then you would have gone back to have killed your grandfather. So do you see the paradox? If time travel is possible, it leads to an impossibility, right? If time travel is possible, it seems that it leads to a paradox that can't be resolved. Okay, so is there a way to resolve this? Is there a way to say this paradox actually can't exist or won't exist? Let's take a look. So you maybe can only go to the past, right? But you traveling to your past only allows you to create your future. So time travel is possible. So you can go to the past, but what you do in the past is only the things that lead to your present day. So when you go to the past, maybe it's because of you going to the past that your grandfather actually meets your grandmother. Maybe when you go to the past, it's only by you going to the past that they actually fall in love, right? Or you going to the past, only you being able to go to the past is what causes you, or what causes your dad to fall in love with your mom. Maybe you do something in the past that, you know, sparks that relationship. But either way, in this counter argument, it's saying time travel is possible, but you can only go to the past to create, your past, right? The past that leads to you. What else? Well, maybe time travel is possible, but the universe won't let you kill your grandfather. Okay, so you go and travel to the past and you have a gun and then you try to kill your grandfather, but then your gun doesn't work. Or you travel to the past and you buy a gun to kill your grandfather, but then the gun shoots you instead. Somehow, the universe makes it so that you cannot alter the events that lead to that point in time. That no matter what you want to do, the universe will have it so that you cannot alter your past that leads to what you're doing right now in the past. Okay? Confused yet? Counter number 3. Maybe you can go to the past, right? You can time travel to the past, but whatever you do there alters the future and you create an alternative timeline. Maybe that's one way of getting around the paradox. Okay, so let's take a look. So let's say yesterday, right, you got your midterm exam and you noticed that you failed. Like, oh man, I failed my midterm exam. And because you're so distraught over failing your midterm exam, you crashed your car as you're driving around town. And then because you crashed your car and you told your parents, man, I failed my exam and then I totaled the car, your parents get so irritated, get so upset that they decide to have a divorce. Right? And now you are upset. You are distraught because your parents are having a divorce because of all the things that you did. So, oh, actually, before that, because your parents were so angry at you for having caused their divorce, they take you off both of their wills. Okay, so now even more reason for you to be distraught. You failed the exam, you totaled the car, your parents getting a divorce, and then because of you, they decide to take you off of their will. Okay, well, luckily you took a class on philosophy that talked about time travel, so you decided to build a time machine and fix all of this. You decide to build a time machine and go back in time and then ace your exam so that none of these things happen. Okay? So from yesterday, we get to today where you make the time machine and then you go back in time. Now, when you go back in time, maybe what happens is that you create a new timeline. So from today, when you step into the time machine, once you go back in time, that timeline where you went into the time machine will continue without you because you've disappeared, because you've gone back in time. And then when you go back in time to the day of the exam to retake it, that now creates a new timeline where all of the events from that point forward is like a new universe, right? So you're creating an alternative possibility by going back in time and time traveling. So to recap, you step into the time machine. From that point forward, that original timeline will exist without you. But when you go back in time, you are now creating a new timeline. So you're not altering the events that caused you to go into the time machine in the first place, because that would lead to a paradox, right? Just like we saw with the grandfather paradox. Instead, once you go back in time to alter events, you are altering events in a way where now you have an alternative timeline to the original one. This happens to be the plot of many time traveling movies, right? Alternate timelines. Okay. Well, this gets around the paradox, but then there's some interesting questions like, is this really time traveling? Are you really going to the past, or are you just basically jumping across different timelines? Are you basically just traversing universes? Is this really what we think of when we think of time travel? Okay. So what do you think? Or do any of these solutions to the grandfather paradox work for you? Is the grandfather paradox no longer a problem that prevents you from believing time travel is possible? Well, there's a third argument against time travel, and this is the no tourist argument. Can you tell by the title of the argument what it might be about? The no tourist argument. Look, if time travel is possible, says the argument, then where are all the time travelers? Shouldn't they be around? Shouldn't they be looking and watching and like hanging out, taking pictures? And where are they? Where are the time travelers? We should see them, right? Because surely people in the future will want to come back and check us out and what we're going through and observing and all that. Okay. Well, what are some possible ways of countering the no tourist argument? Well, I mean, you could say that maybe rules are in place where, you know, future humans aren't allowed to be noticed when they time travel, right? So maybe they are here, but they're not allowed to show themselves, or they're not allowed to be overt about their presence because they don't want to influence or change their past. Maybe you can say that um, time travel is possible, but not like your physical body. Maybe it's just your consciousness, right? Maybe your consciousness go to the past. So maybe that's why we don't see them. What else could you say? Maybe time travel is possible, but you're not allowed to go to the past, right? Or you could say time travel is possible, but we never make it to the point where we can make a time machine because we kill ourselves before then, right? So time travel is possible, but obviously it takes a while for us to develop the technology. But humans just die off before they get to the point where they can develop the technology, either because of disease or because of nuclear war or because of global warming or for any number of reasons. A comet hits us. Time travel is possible, but we never get to the point where we're sophisticated enough to make it. Well, what else is possible? Well, maybe they they are around us. Maybe we have seen time travelers. We just don't believe them. You can do a quick Google search and you can probably find people who claim to be time travelers. So there is evidence they're around. We just don't believe the fact that they're time travelers. One of the more famous examples of this was John Titor. So back in I think 2000 or 2001, John Titor was a name of a person that would post on this discussion board, and he would claim to be a time traveler from like 2036, who went back to the 1970s to grab this old IBM computer because for some reason they needed this old IBM computer in the future. So he would post on this message board talking about the fact that he's a time traveler, and they're giving, describing events that's going to happen in the future. And a lot of people believed him. A lot of people said, wow, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. He seems to have authority about the future, right? So he claimed that while he was time traveling to go get this old IBM computer in the 70s, he decided to check out, the year 2000. It was kind of like a side trip. Some of the predictions or some of the events he claimed would be in our future, where things like a civil conflict over a US presidential election, um, told us about to worry about mad cow disease, and told us about an impending nuclear war with Russia. So, what do you think? You can go Google John Titor and read all about him and see all his posts, and then you can come to a conclusion for yourself. So, after going through all of these arguments against time travel, where do you lean? Based upon all of them, do you think time travel is logically possible? Or are there too many, paradoxes and contradictions for you to believe, no matter what Einstein says, that time travel is just not logically possible? So this was just the first big question that comes about because of Einstein's theory of, or description of space-time, right? That if time is another dimension, just like, height, width, depth, height, width, depth, height, width, and depth are dimensions, then we could possibly move in time to the past and the future. But the other implication too then is that if the future's out there, then the future's set. And if the future is set, then do you really have any choice in the present moment? Right? Does free will exist? And that's a question we'll start taking a look at within the next couple of lectures.